Your stomach is unsettled right now. Not sick exactly, just off. Bloated, a little inflamed for no clear reason you can point to. For most of human history, that feeling would have been strange, almost impossible, because for roughly 99% of the time humans have existed, the gut carried something you don't have anymore. Something scientists only rediscovered by digging up fossilized poop. Yes, poop. Preserved for thousands of years, sitting in dry caves, waiting to be studied. Scientists call it a coprolite. That's just the technical word for petrified feces. Ancient waste that dried out fast enough, in a cave dry enough to fossilize instead of rot away. To most people, that sounds like archaeology's least glamorous job. But inside those coprolites is something almost nobody expected to survive intact: DNA. Not just human DNA, microbial DNA. The genetic fingerprints of an entire ecosystem that used to live inside your ancestors and that mostly doesn't live inside you. Molecular anthropologist Cecil Lewis at the University of Oklahoma has spent years extracting exactly that. His lab pulled genetic material from coprolites recovered at 3 very different archaeological sites. Hinds Cave in Texas, where the samples date back roughly 8,000 years. Rio Zapa in Mexico, at a site called the Cave of the Dead Children, where the feces are closer to 1,000 years old. And Caserones, high in the arid deserts of northern Chile, a site with its own separate timeline. 3 sites, 3 different climates, 3 different diets and centuries. And yet, when Lewis's team sequenced what was inside, the samples kept telling a strikingly similar story. The ancient gut was crowded, startlingly crowded. Hundreds of species of bacteria, layered together in a dense, interconnected ecosystem, all sharing the same digestive tract at once. Some broke down tough plant fiber. Others fed on what those bacteria left behind. Entire chains of microbes, each one dependent on the next, working the same stretch of intestine like a rainforest works a single hillside. What's striking is how consistent this was across such different lives. The people at Hinds Cave were living in the dry hill country of Texas, eating whatever the desert scrub offered them. The people at Rio Zapa, thousands of years later and hundreds of miles south, were chewing roasted agave hearts in a Mexican valley. The people at Caserones were surviving in one of the driest deserts on the planet. Different plants, different climates, different centuries entirely, and yet each coprolite told the same underlying story: a gut built around abundance, not scarcity, of bacterial life. Now compare that to a modern industrialized gut. Researchers sampling people in wealthy, urbanized nations consistently find something far sparser. Fewer species, fewer connections between them, a thinner, simpler web, where entire branches of that ancient chain have gone quiet. So what happened? Did your ancestors just live dirtier lives packed with parasites and modern hygiene simply scrubbed all of that away? That's the obvious explanation. It's also, according to the evidence, mostly backwards. A crowded gut isn't primarily a sign of filth. It's a sign of resilience. Picture a rainforest with 1,000 interlocking species. Remove a few, and the ecosystem barely notices. Something else absorbs the gap and the forest keeps functioning. Now picture a single monoculture field, planted with one crop alone. Introduce one new pest, one new disease, and the whole field can collapse in a season. Your gut works the same way. Diversity isn't a byproduct of ancient life. It's what made that life survivable. And you don't need 1,000-year-old coprolites to watch this play out in real time. In 2014, biologist Stephanie Schnorr led a study on the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer community in Tanzania who still forage a large share of their food directly from the wild landscape around them. Her team sequenced the bacteria living in Hadza guts and compared the results to people living in industrialized Italy. The gap was staggering. On average, a Hadza gut carried somewhere around 730 distinct species of bacteria. A separate study of average Californians found closer to 277, less than half. The Hadza gut also carried something almost entirely absent from Western intestines, a bacterium called treponema, a specialist built to break down the tough, fibrous roots and wild tubers that make up so much of a forager's diet. In its place, Western guts are typically dominated by a very different microbe, bifidobacterium, a species far better suited to the softer, sugar-dense, heavily processed carbohydrates that fill a modern plate. 2 different microbes, adapted to 2 entirely different ways of eating, standing in for 2 entirely different ways of life. So picture it. Really picture a single day inside that ancient gut. You wake up in a dry, rocky valley in what is now northern Mexico, roughly 1,000 years ago. Breakfast isn't cereal poured from a box. It's the roasted, fibrous heart of an agave plant, tough and stringy, laced with a kind of coarse fiber your modern gut would barely recognize. You chew it slowly, methodically, because it demands to be chewed. Your saliva starts breaking down complex starches most people alive today never encounter in this raw A form. By the time that mouthful reaches your intestines, an army of specialized bacteria is already waiting there, each species built to dismantle one particular piece of that plant, one particular chain of sugar. Nothing goes to waste. Nothing sits half-digested, fermenting into bloating and discomfort. The system was refined over hundreds of thousands of years for exactly this kind of demanding, fibrous food. Now picture your gut today. Bagged salad, a protein bar, something reheated in a box built for shelf life, not fiber content. Fewer of those old fiber specialists ever get fed a meal they recognize, so fewer of them survive to reproduce. Generation after generation, without the wild, coarse plant matter they evolved to process, entire bacterial lineages quietly starve out. Nobody removed them on purpose. Nobody sterilized them away with soap. They simply stopped being fed meal after meal, decade after decade, until they thinned out and mostly disappeared. Here's the part that reframes everything. It's tempting to assume ancient humans without soap, antibiotics, or modern sanitation must have carried the dirtier, more dangerous guts. And that modern hygiene is what finally cleaned us up on the inside. But the Coprolite record, sitting right alongside the Hadza comparison, points towards something closer to the opposite. Your ancestors' guts weren't dirtier. They were richer. A dense, self-balancing ecosystem tuned by deep time, able to absorb disruptions that would send a thinner modern microbiome straight into crisis. And when an ecosystem that size quietly shrinks, generation after generation, nobody notices the exact moment it happens. There's no single day where it collapses. You only notice the aftermath, decades later, as a background hum of digestive trouble that everyone around you seems to share. Rising rates of bloating and irritable digestion, allergies that were rare a century ago, now common in schoolyards. Autoimmune conditions climbing steadily across industrialized nations for reasons researchers are still untangling. None of this proves one bacterium causes one disease. Human health is far too tangled for a story that simple. But scientists studying the gap between ancient and modern microbiomes keep circling the same uncomfortable possibility. Somewhere between the wild, fibrous tubers your ancestors chewed and the packaged, softened food on your counter today, an entire hidden organ made of hundreds of interdependent species quietly lost most of its population. And you inherited whatever was left of it. Think about how strange that is. Your bones tell a story that unfolds over your own lifetime. Your gut microbiome tells a story that unfolds over dozens of lifetimes, quietly renegotiated with every generation's plate. Nobody in that chain made a single dramatic decision to abandon it. A grandmother switched from foraged tubers to farmed grain. A grandson switched from farmed grain to packaged bread. A great-granddaughter added antibiotics, food preservatives, and hand sanitizer into the mix. Each step felt small, even reasonable at the time. Only across the full arc, laid out next to a 1,000-year-old coprolite, does the scale of what quietly went missing become visible at all. That's the strange power of studying something as unglamorous as fossilized waste. A coprolite isn't just a record of what one person ate for dinner 1,000 years ago. It's a record of an ecosystem living inside a human body that has been shrinking for generations, so slowly that no single lifetime could ever notice the difference happening in real time. It took dry caves, buried feces, and a molecular anthropologist patient enough to sequence what was left, just to prove the ecosystem was ever there at all. So the next time your stomach feels unsettled for no clear reason, consider a different explanation than the obvious one. Maybe it isn't something you ate today. Maybe it's something your gut has been missing for a very long time. An old, crowded, resilient ecosystem built across hundreds of thousands of years of coarse, wild, demanding food, quietly waiting for the kind of fiber it hasn't tasted in generations.